communities. Fears are soaring in Ukraine, though, right now over a possible Russian invasion. NATO is sending ships and fighter jets to the region. Thousands of troops are on standby as well. We'll have the latest from inside Ukraine in just one moment. But first, CBS News senior White House political correspondent Ed O'Keefe has more on the response from Washington.
I had a very, very, very good meeting, total unanimity with all the European leaders.
President Biden today consulted with European allies in the Situation Room, readying thousands of U.S. troops for a possible mission in the region.
It's very clear that the Russians have no intention right now of de-escalating.
The Pentagon placed 8,500 troops stationed in the U.S. on alert, ready to deploy to NATO's eastern flank within days if the situation deteriorates.
We are not deploying them now. We are not saying diplomacy is dead.
But the administration ordered U.S. embassy families out of Ukraine and warned Americans not to travel to Russia, as Vladimir Putin sent more troops into Belarus, a possible invasion point, and carried out military exercises in the Baltic Sea.
After this weekend, is he more or less concerned about the possibility of a Russian invasion of Ukraine?
He said last week that military action by Russia could come at any time. That remains his point of view.
The U.S. is hoping its own show of force would deter Putin. Fighter jets could be sent to NATO countries as well as warships. The USS Truman arrived in the eastern Mediterranean today for long-scheduled exercises. But NATO is also bolstering defenses, with the Danish, French, and Dutch sending jets and troops. The president's threat of punishing sanctions if Putin invades
Russia will pay a heavy price.
Hasn't forced the Russian leader to pull back the nearly 130,000 troops on Ukraine's border. And with more of his forces going into Belarus, the administration has shifted tactics.
What happened then in the last few days that prompted the Pentagon to present specific potential troop deployments to the president? Or put another way, why now?
I wouldn't say it's a response to an abrupt moment. It's a part of an ongoing contingency planning process and discussion.
Also tonight, the president was asked by a Fox News reporter whether rising inflation would be a liability in this year's elections. He gave this testy response as reporters walked out.
That's a great asset. More inflation. What a stupid son of a bitch.
The Department of Homeland Security is warning of a potential cyber attack against the U.S. by Russia if American and NATO forces respond to a Russian invasion of Ukraine. But U.S. officials say they see no signs that Moscow is currently preparing for such an attack. Jerika?
Ed O'Keefe, thank you. As the U.S. and its allies prepare to respond, we take a closer look at what those living in Ukraine are facing. Holly Williams is in the capital city of Kyiv.
I mean, if there's a Russian ground invasion, this village is potentially in the firing line.
In the village of Senkivka, under 2 miles from Ukraine's border with Russia, Tetiana Semak told us if there's an invasion, many people here will have nowhere to run. On the other side of the border are massed 127,000 Russian troops, according to Ukraine's government. Today, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky told the people of his country not to panic. Nina Belaya is 79, born when Ukraine was under Nazi occupation in the Second World War. She showed us her cellar, where she stores food for the winter. She has another purpose in mind if the Russians show up.
And you can take shelter down here if the Russians invade.
Ukraine is not a wealthy country. Now its freedom and its young democracy are threatened by its colossal neighbour. And what some say are President Vladimir Putin's ambitions to create a new Russian empire.
On Tuesday, we're expecting another shipment of emergency military assistance from the US, including munitions, to arrive here in Kyiv. Jerika.
Holly Williams, thank you. The Supreme Court has agreed to reconsider the role of race in college admissions. Justices will hear 2 challenges to affirmative action at Harvard University and the University of North Carolina. The lawsuits claim the admissions process discriminates against Asian students. The High Court has repeatedly upheld affirmative action in the past, but the conservative supermajority is less likely to find the practice constitutional. The court will likely hear the cases in its next term, which begins in October. Well, later this week, a judge will decide whether or not the founder of a right-wing militia should remain in custody as he awaits trial on charges related to the January 6th insurrection. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane has the details tonight from Capitol Hill.
In the courthouse in Plano, Texas, prosecutors accused Oath Keepers founder Stewart Rhodes of using force to stop the peaceful transfer of power and said he must remain in jail pending trial. Lawyers revealed that Rhodes, the alleged coordinator of the Oath Keepers' assault on the Capitol, is also cooperating with the January 6th committee, making him the latest key figure to do so. CBS News has confirmed the committee is investigating a draft executive order circulated by some in the Trump administration that would have ordered the Pentagon to seize voting machines from several battleground states where they alleged fraud took place.
We are concerned that our military was part of this big lie on promoting that the election was false.
The order, which was never signed by former President Trump, would have also involved the Department of Justice. Thompson revealed Sunday that former Attorney General Bill Barr has had a voluntary conversation with the committee.
So if you are using the military to potentially seize voting machines, even though it's a discussion, the public needs to know. We've never had that before.
Meanwhile, the court in Georgia has granted a local prosecutor's request for a special grand jury to investigate whether the former president tried to interfere in Georgia's 2020 election results. Mr. Trump has referred to that as a political witch hunt. Jerika?
Scott MacFarlane from the Capitol, thank you. The recent COVID-19 wave caused by the highly contagious Omicron variant is now showing signs of receding in the Northeast. But the surge has still not yet peaked in many other parts of the United States, especially where vaccine rates are lagging. Meanwhile, COVID infections forced hundreds of schools to cancel in-person learning for at least one day last week across the nation. The debate to keep schools open has been ongoing. And in Virginia, the state's governor has made masks optional. But some school districts are taking legal action. Meg Oliver has more.
There's a face-off over face coverings in Virginia public schools after the governor's executive order letting parents opt out of school mask mandates took effect today.
It's parents that should decide the health measures taken for their children.
And many parents agree. This morning, a group of them in Stafford County arrived at their children's elementary school with the intent to send them in without masks. Despite the district's policy, 6 families were turned away and offered virtual.
Masks have played a role in our children's lack of education, and those masks are directly impacting their ability to learn.
But 7 county school boards have filed a lawsuit against Governor Youngkin, seeking to block the executive order. The lawsuit represents more than 350,000 students across Virginia, arguing that the state constitution gives local school boards the authority to enact policies that protect the health and well-being of students and staff. It also cites a state law requiring school systems to follow CDC health guidelines, which recommends universal masking in schools regardless of vaccination status. Amber Bomer, one of 13 parents in a separate lawsuit, has long COVID and asthma.
We are fighting for all of the children of Virginia and all of the teachers and the parents and all of the immunocompromised individuals who work and attend the schools within our school system.
Chris Wilson, a father of 2, also supports mask mandates.
Not a problem, and the kids support it. They know it's the right thing to do. We also know this is not a forever decision. This is a temporary decision.
Here in Virginia, the lawsuits ask the mask mandate remain in place until the court reaches a decision. Meanwhile, today in Los Angeles, students were required to upgrade their mandatory masks to something other than non-cloth with a nose wire. Jerika?
All right, Meg Oliver for us tonight. Thank you. Coming up after the break, a violent few days for police officers after several are shot in cities across this country. What some experts believe is fueling the spike in gun violence. Plus, the civil rights trial of 3 former police officers who were present at George Floyd's death gets underway in Minnesota, why their defense says they're not to blame. Stick around, you're streaming CBS News.
In an original CBS Reports documentary.
This place is at the very tip of the spear when it comes to Satanism and witchcraft and demonism.
Has the church been this divided?
Not in my lifetime. They've been radicalized in their approach to politics.
United in Christ, divided by politics.
We have what I call a cowardly pastor problem because they don't want to get involved in the political situation.
Conservative Christianity and Republicanism have grasped hands in a way that's very unhealthy.
There are churches whose members have divided over partisan politics.
How an evangelical civil war could change the spirit of America.
This was a heavily Christian-influenced attack.
When we have the ability to say that God is on our side, it allows us to justify all kinds of cruelty.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
CBS News Miami, powered by CBS 4 News. Get closer to the big stories, breaking news and weather live as it happens. Stream the local team you trust on the CBS News app. Download now.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
One person is dead and 3 others injured after a gunman opened fire at a German university. This all happened Monday inside a lecture hall at Heidelberg University. Police say the suspected gunman, an 18-year-old biology student at the school. Authorities say he killed himself after the attack. A motive for the shooting is not yet known. Law enforcement officers in several major U.S. cities have recently been targets of gun violence. Here in New York City, Mayor Eric Adams says he is cracking down on illegal firearms after one officer was killed in the line of duty just last week. Jeff Pegues has more.
When New York City police officers Wilbert Mora and Jason Rivera responded to a domestic call in Harlem, a barrage of gunfire greeted them in an apartment hallway. Rivera was killed, and Mora is in critical condition. In Houston, Corporal Charles Galloway was ambushed during a routine traffic stop after a suspect who was still on the run emerged from a vehicle, firing a gun, riddling the squad car with bullet holes.
This is a ruthless, savage execution.
A manhunt is also underway in Washington, D.C. for the suspect who shot an officer Sunday night.
He pulled a firearm, fired several shots at our officers.
Is there such a thing as a routine call?
No, not at all. Every single incident has the capacity to turn deadly.
Deadly violence sparked by illegal guns, striking down officers and people on city streets. A steady flow of weapons into major cities. New York's mayor says police took more than 6,000 guns off the streets last year.
It is illegal to carry a gun in our city, yet our police officers take them off the streets every day in record numbers.
The suspect accused of killing Officer Rivera died today after being shot at the scene, where police say he was armed with this illegal gun, equipped with a high-capacity magazine capable of holding 40 rounds. Police also say they found an illegal, loaded AR-15 assault rifle under the suspect's mattress. Officer Jason Rivera, just 22 years old, grew up in the city of New York. He was asked at the beginning of his career why he was joining the force. He said that he wanted to see better relations between the community and the police. Jerika.
Oh, God bless him and his family. Jeff Pegues, thank you. Opening statements began Monday in the federal trial of 3 former police officers who were at the scene of George Floyd's murder. They're accused of violating Floyd's civil rights. Mola Langi has more from St. Paul, Minnesota.
I can't breathe. You're doing fine. You're talking fine.
Today, prosecutors said the 3 officers didn't lift a finger when George Floyd said he couldn't breathe at least 25 times, while Derek Chauvin kneeled on Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes.
I can't move.
In their opening statements, prosecutors insisted it was more about what the 3 former Minneapolis police officers did not do than what they did. That 2 officers, Tu Tao and Alex King, failed in their duty of stopping a police officer they see using excessive force. Tao, King, and Thomas Lane are charged with denying Floyd's civil rights by not providing the first aid that could have kept him alive.
What they're trying to say is that Chauvin did it all on his own, and they, meaning the other defendants, were not trying to help Mr. Chauvin violate Mr. Floyd's rights.
Just gonna let him keep his hand on his neck, bro?
Prosecutors allege during Floyd's deadly arrest in May of 2020, Tao held bystanders back while King kneeled on Floyd's back for 8 minutes and Lane held down Floyd's legs. Lane can be heard twice asking Derek Chauvin if they should reposition Floyd. Another defense attorney, Thomas Plunkett, called Floyd's death a failure by the Minneapolis Police Department and a lack of adequate training.
When you use that argument, it's almost like you're saying, yes, this is true, he did it, but he wasn't properly trained.
Thomas Lane and Alex King were relatively new to the Minneapolis Police Department. They'd been on patrol for less than a week when George Floyd was killed. Thomas Lane's attorney said today that Lane will testify in his own defense in this trial, though it's unclear if the other 2 officers or if Derek Chauvin will take the stand in this trial. Tarika?
Mola Langi, thank you. 3 firefighters are dead and 1 is in critical condition after a 2-alarm fire in Baltimore. Authorities say flames erupted at a vacant 3-story row home early Monday morning. The fire caused part of the building to collapse, trapping firefighters inside. 1 was pronounced dead at the scene. 2 others later died at the hospital, and a 4th firefighter remains hospitalized. Investigators are still looking into what actually caused this fire. Well, the tax filing season is officially underway, but as Michael George reports, it may take longer than normal for some Americans to get that very important refund.
Last year, Claudia Longo filed her tax return in February. When she didn't receive it in a couple of months, she called the IRS.
You would be on hold for a long time, and then maybe that call gets dropped, or they send it to a different place, and then you have to wait again.
After calling multiple times and even reaching out to her senator, Longo finally got her tax refund 5 months later in August.
I was hoping to get that money to start my daughter on orthodontist treatment, and we had to delay it.
Around 30 million taxpayers had their refunds delayed last year because of pandemic-related issues, and the IRS is still playing catch-up. The Treasury Department is warning of more delays again this year.
What are some of the reasons we might see some delays this year?
Well, first of all, if your information doesn't match on the IRS systems, they'll certainly create problems.
Mark Stieber with Jackson Hewitt says the expanded child tax credit is a potential pitfall. Most parents only got half the money they were owed. The IRS is now sending out letters to help people properly file for the rest.
And that can be a little complicated. You have to fill out the form on how many dependents you have. You may have new dependents. Shared custody can create a complication.
Stieber says unemployment benefits are taxable. Stimulus checks are not, but still need to be reported on 2021 tax returns.
So make sure you understand what is taxable and what is not taxable.
The fastest way to get a refund is to file electronically and set up direct deposit. The IRS says most people who do that get a refund within 21 days. Michael George, CBS News, New York.
Good information. Ongoing challenges with the nation's supply chain are making it harder to find baby formula on the shelves. CBS News' Anna Warner has more.
He's a little happy boy.
San Francisco residents Irene and Mario Anhook are the parents of Marlo, a 10-month-old boy. His mom can't breastfeed, so from birth they've fed him a liquid infant formula from Similac, but now say it's in short supply.
We've noticed it being difficult to find maybe a couple months ago, 2-3 months ago, and then just recently we can't find it. We've tried all the local Targets. We checked Costco's, Costco online, Walgreens, Long's. Can't find it anywhere.
Her husband even drove an hour away. No luck. So the couple switched to the powdered version of the formula, but say Marlo sometimes spits it up or won't finish it.
It's just worrisome a little bit for us because we want to just make sure he's getting all the calories he needs and all the nutrition he needs from the formula because he's not a year yet.
Many parents around the country are reporting the same thing: bare shelves or very low stocks of baby formula from New York to Washington state. The Infant Nutrition Council of America confirms reports of challenges across supply chains.
It's been worsening a little bit in the last 3-4 weeks.
If you can sell more.
KK DeVay with retail research firm IRI says for major brands of baby formula powder, the average national in-stock rate before the pandemic was 95%. But his firm found as of last week, rates of availability across 10 national retailers ranged from 98% to as low as 75%. Powdered formula was less available in some cities, including Seattle, Wichita, Kansas, and Tucson.
Why are there shortages on infant formula?
Some of the shortages are related to procuring the raw materials, some of it in production, some of it is in packaging, and then labor shortages in the factory, in transportation.
Empty shelves are what mom Tiffany Mannon says she's been finding north of Orlando, Florida.
No matter where we looked, it was sold out.
Her 10-week-old son, Corbin, was born 6 weeks premature. She says doctors instructed her to feed him a liquid Enfamil product so he'd gain weight. The company helped by sending her free cases of the product. But now, she says, local stores are out of the liquid and powder versions.
Are you worried?
I am worried. It comes to our minds of, once we do run out of this formula, what's going to happen if they're sold out?
Enfamil's maker Reckitt told us they have ample supply of their formula products, but said U.S. baby formula industry-wide sales are up 18%, which is more than double birth rates. The company says in response, it's ramping up production and is currently shipping 50% more product to address issues as fast as possible. The manufacturer of Similac products, Abbott, did not respond to our questions about supplies and availability. Neither did Nestle, which makes Gerber products. Tiffany Mannon says she worries with parents like her on the hunt for supplies, some may choose to hoard formula, leaving her to go without.
This is my child. How am I supposed to feed my child if he does not have what he needs to be fed? Because people are either hoarding it or there's product shortage.
We reached out to major retail outlets, including Walgreens, Amazon, CVS, and Target. All said they are working with suppliers to cover customer demand. Abbott referred us to the Infant Nutrition Council. That group says manufacturers are working to ensure better availability of infant formula. Anna Werner, CBS News, San Francisco.
Coming up after the break, a rare winter wildfire burns through one of California's most iconic destinations. How authorities are working to mitigate what seems like a never-ending fire season in the state. Plus, the James Webb Space Telescope arrives at its new home. What scientists are hoping to learn from the most advanced space observatory ever built. You're watching CBS News.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
This place is at the very tip of the spear when it comes to Satanism and witchcraft and demonism.
Has the church been this divided?
Not in my lifetime. They've been radicalized in their approach to politics.
United in Christ, divided by politics.
We have what I call a cowardly pastor problem because they don't want to get involved in the political situation.
Conservative Christianity and Republicanism have grasped hands in a way that's very unhealthy.
There are churches whose members
How an evangelical civil war could change the spirit of America.
This was a heavily Christian-influenced attack.
When we have the ability to say that God is on our side, it allows us to justify all kinds of cruelty.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
CBS News Miami, powered by CBS 4 News. Get closer to the big stories, breaking news and weather live as it happens. Stream the Download now.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
Just follow me. I'll lead the way.
Welcome to CBS Mornings.
See something new.
Oh my God, that was a good moment.
Learn something new. I think this is so fun.
Meet someone new. Like me. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
I came to shine because you guys are shining this morning.
CBS Mornings, weekdays on CBS.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
50 shows running, the lights blinking.
People fight their entire career to get to Broadway.
You've trained your entire life.
Spotlights, drama, passion.
This is what we live for.
Until COVID turned off the lights.
It's like going from a bright light to pitch black.
Scenes from Broadway's unique struggle with COVID.
It was devastating.
Broadway contributes about $15 billion to New York City's economy and 100,000 jobs.
The sound team, the lighting team, everyone.
The world does not realize how big this is.
This is how we make money.
This is a specialized industry. You don't tell a doctor to go get a serving job. Like, why are we different?
Are we going to be able to pay our rent? Am I going to have food?
What will happen in Broadway's new opening act?
We're in uncharted waters again.
The show must go on.
There is reason to hope again.
I think people are going to be crying. I know I will.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
Welcome back to CBS News. Here's a look at our top stories. 7 Virginia school districts sue Governor Glenn Youngkin over his executive order making masks in schools optional. The districts argue the state's constitution gives them authority over the health and well-being of students and staff. The U.S. Supreme Court will hear 2 cases involving affirmative action and college admissions. Separate lawsuits accuse Harvard and the University of North Carolina of discriminating against Asian students. The cases could be heard as soon as October. With fears growing that Russia could invade Ukraine at any point, the Pentagon is putting 8,500 troops on standby for possible deployment in Europe. The State Department is also ordering U.S. citizens and some embassy personnel to leave Ukraine's capital city. A dangerous wildfire is burning in Northern California. The Colorado fire near Big Sur has so far burned 700 acres of land. Some residents have also been forced to evacuate. Danya Backus reports.
The Colorado fire broke out Friday and quickly spread into the rugged mountains near Big Sur. By the weekend, it made a run toward the Pacific Ocean, forcing the closure of Route 1, the Pacific Coast Highway. Flames came dangerously close to Big Sur's iconic Bixby Bridge, but the span was not damaged. About 500 people have evacuated. While the cause is still unknown, wind gusts of up to 50 miles per hour and dead vegetation are feeding the flames. The fire broke out hours after California Governor Gavin Newsom accepted $600 million in aid from Vice President Kamala Harris. The state will use the federal money for projects to reduce wildfire risk.
You heard about the loss of 7 million acres just in the last 2 years in the state of California. But it's the fear of loss that's beyond just those acres. It's the fear of losing traditions, lifestyles, people.
Cal Fire officials say it's unusual to have a wildfire on the coast this time of year. And despite months of record-breaking rain and snow, the National Weather Service described the fast-moving fire as surreal. Danya Backus, CBS News.
For more on this, I want to bring in Stuart Paley. He's an environmental photographer and photojournalist who has captured a number of wildfires in his career, some of those amazing shots to really give perspective. Stuart, I don't have to tell you this, but you know Big Sur is one of the most scenic and beautiful coastlines in California. What impact is this fire actually having on the surrounding community?
Well, thank you, Jerika, for having me on. Of course, Big Sur and the Bixby Bridge is one of the crown jewels of the California coast, and to have that highway closed in winter when a lot of people are doing road trips really hurts the community. In addition to previous landslides, COVID-related closures, small businesses are losing patronage. People are having to reroute around the bridge. But more importantly, hundreds of people have been evacuated, and there is an unconfirmed report of some structure loss to residents there. And thankfully, this fire has not damaged as much as we first hoped it did. And unfortunately, we had a strong wind event that pushed this fire to the Pacific Ocean almost overnight.
Do you have any idea just how long those people will be forced to be evacuated from their homes?
That's a great question. It always depends on the behavior of the fire. Thankfully, the winds have died down and fire behavior has moderated. There's about 300 firefighters assigned to the incident, fighting the fire around the clock. Containment as of this morning was at 35%, and the fire was about 700 acres. So, the containment is going up. Conditions are improving, but firefighters aren't going to allow civilians back in until they deem the area safe. And there's other things like possible rock slides, areas that have lost vegetation that could also cause mudslides in the winter later on this season when we get more rain. So firefighters are going to do everything they can to get residents back in as quickly as possible. But as always, their focus is on safety. But they were also short-staffed fighting this fire. I mean, it's the off-season. We're not supposed to have fires like this in January.
Yeah, and as Danya mentioned in her piece, the National Weather Service said that this fire is surreal. And given that it's happening after the months of record-breaking rain and snow, how has it been in terms of the ability for this fire to spread so fast? How is that possible for those of us who aren't from that region and understanding that?
Sure. So California has been in an extreme drought on and off for nearly the last decade. And while we did receive record-breaking rains in December, unfortunately, the deficit we were in for the drought was so high that these extreme rains were not quite enough to clear that. So as much as vegetation has recovered with more water in the forests and in the chaparral near the coast, this vegetation is still stressed. There's a lot of dead vegetation from seasons past. And so when you have very strong winds, even though there's many green fuels with moisture in them, the fire is still able to spread quickly. And firefighters that I spoke to after this fire started are concerned about what's going to happen this season. Certain federal agencies are having trouble retaining wildland firefighters. And despite some of those pay increases and funding that was mentioned for California and beyond, firefighters on the ground are seeing a trickle of those resources going into to help them at this point on a federal level. And I'm hopeful that Congress will act in time for this coming fire season to give our boots on the ground better resources to fight these blazes.
And to that point, Stuart, wildland fire crews are facing staffing shortages. What might be contributing to that? And how do you think this speaks to what other departments might also be dealing with when you talk about lack of funding and lack of resources?
Well, California has very complex wildland fire issues. We have state, federal, local resources, and everyone's got a different budget. But on the federal level, we're asking more of our wildland firefighters every season. They're gone for 3 months straight. Their pay is not competitive with other agencies. And so the recent infrastructure bill did do a pay increase for these wildland firefighters, but frankly, it's not enough. And there has been a bill introduced both in the House and the Senate, H.R. 5161, the Tim Hart Wildland Firefighter Pay and Recognition Act. And what that works to do is to help pay these firefighters better so agencies on the federal government side can retain firefighters because they're going to private business or leaving the fire world altogether. And we're losing decades of suppression experience. And right now with climate change, drought, and where and how we build, we need all hands on deck to keep people safe here in California.
Safety is always key. And you see those beautiful images of California when there is no fire, but it's always devastating and tough to watch, homes and communities have to deal with that. Stuart Paley, photographer, photojournalist, bringing us all the details. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is getting the chance to appeal his extradition to the United States. On Monday, a British court ruled the 50-year-old can challenge the case to the UK Supreme Court. Assange is currently in a London jail awaiting a ruling on his extradition. U.S. prosecutors want Assange to stand trial on espionage charges. He faces 18 counts relating to WikiLeaks' release of confidential U.S. military records and diplomatic cables. But his supporters claim he was acting as a journalist and say his prosecution will undermine free press in the U.S.
Julian has to be freed, and we hope that this will soon end. But we are far from achieving justice in this case because Julian has been incarcerated for so long, and he should not have spent a single day in prison.
Assange has 14 days to make an appeal to the Supreme Court. The court will then decide whether or not it will accept the case. Well, all right, athletes from around the world are starting to arrive in Beijing for the Winter Olympics. Ian Lee has more on how China is trying its best to keep the games free of, you know what, COVID-19.
With athletes landing in Beijing for next week's Olympics, this is the welcoming committee, complete with hazmat suits, masks, and goggles. China's zero tolerance for COVID means it won't be your typical Winter Games. Athletes will be living in a tightly controlled bubble, including Chicago native and bobsledder Asia Evans.
It's best to stay safe and healthy, and I'm honored that we're still able to compete and participate in the Winter Olympic Games.
Anyone entering the bubble must be fully vaccinated or face 21 days in quarantine. China is also mass testing millions in the lead up to the opening ceremony. This Chinese official says we must go all out, seize every second, and be on guard against COVID. Like last summer's games in Tokyo, fans will be banned from events. So they'll have to watch the colorful choreography and competition like the rest of us on their TVs at home. Ian Lee, CBS News.
All right, we've got some big news in the space world. Monday marked a moment NASA scientists have been working toward for years, like 25, in fact. We've been telling you about this Space Watch story since late last year. Now the James Webb Telescope has reached its hovering orbit. Lana Zach joins us now with more.
Hey, Julian. So the James Webb Telescope, you mentioned it was conceived in the 1980s, developed in the 1990s, almost got killed several times,
yes.
But now it is home. Over the next several months, it will synchronize its mirrors as it brings into focus images never before seen by humans with a whopping $10 billion price tag. The James Webb Telescope is a tremendous investment in our understanding of space. And as you know, a lot can go wrong in space. This particular endeavor had hundreds of little things that all needed to go perfectly right for the mission to be a success. And luckily, so far, it has been. But let me show you an example of just how precarious this mission is. The telescope's environment is extreme. The temperatures on both sides are well beyond our earthly norms. The solar panel side, which faces the sun, will reach a scorching 185 degrees Fahrenheit, a full 55 degrees higher than the hottest day ever recorded here on Earth. And then on the flip side, the mirrors will be positioned in temperatures plummeting down to negative 388 degrees. So you may be wondering why position this delicate instrument in such an extreme situation. But at Lagrange Point 2, NASA says that the gravitational forces and orbital motion will create a balance that allows the telescope to hover as it orbits. And as you can see, James Webb is positioned more than 930,000 miles behind the Earth as it relates to the sun. And so it will continue to orbit as it gears up to start taking these awe-inspiring pictures, which of course always brings me to my favorite part, the mission. The James Webb Telescope is nearly 100 times more powerful than the Hubble, and NASA scientists believe that it will be allowed then to capture light streaming from galaxies and stars more than 13 billion years ago. For perspective, that's 3 times older than our sun. And this means that the telescope has the potential to not only give insight into our planet's origin story, but it could also show us what space was like before our solar system existed. It could prove or disprove hypotheses like string theory, the Big Bang theory, and now we are one step closer to unwrapping these mysteries of our universe, Tarika.
And I saw in an earlier program here streaming that people were wondering, well, will we know if there's life in other places?
You know, I've been talking about this all day, and that's you know, one of the questions that people are wondering about. What this will be able to do is it'll be able to capture images, and when we're talking about these images in space, we're talking about light that is billions of years old. And that's part of the reason for these extreme temperatures, because it's looking at the infrared spectrum of light. It needs to be able to capture that. And so we're probably not going to be like seeing another space civilization, but all of that's one step towards uncovering all the mysteries, all the things that we don't even know. So
exactly. And I noticed
somewhere down the line,
those gold-plated mirrors. Talk about the importance of having them and
that's actually gold that they put on it, and the James Webb telescope is larger than anything that's ever been out there before. And how delicate this instrument is to be out there, and as I mentioned, really it's about capturing that light, and so it has to be so sensitive to be able to withstand the extreme heat on one side and then those freezing cold temperatures on the other.
Well, I look forward to learning more. I heard I think it was the NASA commissioner manager saying the best is yet.
Science geeks have all been turned into giddy little children today. It's really pretty amazing.
Lana, thank you so much. And how did you get through all of that reading? You know how hard that is for the people at home?
You know, when you're this passionate about a subject.
Yes.
It's good to be here with you,
Good to see you in person.
Yes.
All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with the rest of the day's news. Stay with us. You're streaming CBS News.
Hey, CBS News, congrats on your new home and your new look. Don't forget to Instagram it. It'll make your ex so jealous.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I genuinely love the
man with total control of billions of people's stolen data.
Creating lies, denying truths.
Swap a face, make a face, change a voice. Now you have this very powerful machinery for creating synthetic media.
As new technology makes any video content possible.
I saw images of me taken from my social media and posted on these pornographic sites. It was completely horrifying.
How do we distinguish fact from fiction?
The technology has gotten so good that I think it's only a matter of time before deepfakes are used to influence an election.
What have you created?
A monster.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
Breaking news as it happens. CBS News New York on the CBS News app and Pluto TV.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Yoga and wellness has become a place of anti-science.
Online clickbait.
The algorithms feed you content based upon your own fantasy.
Potentially at my peril.
There's no question about it.
Spreading digital disinformation.
Their entire yoga studio and spiritual community got so embedded in all of the QAnon stuff that it became this sick place.
Why pro-health people are fertile ground for anti-science messages.
We can just go into the whole mask thing. A lot of us just believe that's symbolism for silencing people.
People are locked in this mindset. They've been taught to accept what the medical doctors say.
No longer are you going to be willing to take any medical advice.
It's a big problem that we urgently need to address.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
Minnesota's first local news stream is now CBS News Minnesota. Stream your trusted WCCO team for breaking news and weather live in real time on the CBS News app and on Pluto TV.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories
an experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart.
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
Just follow me. I'll lead the way.
Welcome to CBS Mornings.
See something new.
Oh my God, that was a good moment.
Learn something new.
I think this is so fun. Meet someone new. Like me. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
I came to shine because you guys are shining this morning.
CBS Mornings, weekdays on CBS.
So the pandemic has clearly highlighted the physical and mental toll of chronic workplace stress. A recent study by Infinite Potential found nearly 35% of people across 30 countries are experiencing burnout. That's up by more than 5% compared to 2020. The study also shows women and people aged 35 to 44 continue to report high levels of burnout. For more information, I want to bring in Arianna Huffington. She's the CEO and founder of Thrive Global. It's so good to see you, even though we're not in person. We have you here on the screen, so that's always great. But I first want to start off, Arianna, by recognizing that in 2007, you had a frightening experience due to burnout and exhaustion. If you could explain to our viewers what happened and what do you think led to that moment?
Thank you, Jerika, and great to be with you. It was, 2 years into my building HuffPost. I was the divorced mother of 2 daughters, and I had bought into the collective delusion that in order to be super founder and super mom, I couldn't really afford to take care of myself. And that burnout, if you want, is the price I had to pay for success. So I collapsed, I hit my head on my desk, broke my cheekbone, and I was diagnosed with burnout. Now, Jerika, 2007 was early for the word burnout. We left the Huffington Post to launch Thrive Global in 2016. I made our mission to end the stress and burnout epidemic. In 2019, the World Health Organization acknowledged burnout as an occupational hazard. And now, as you said, COVID has exacerbated the situation, which predated COVID, but now it's front and center, and we're seeing companies across the board addressing it because they also see the connection between burnout and stress and productivity and business metrics.
And it's so crucial to have that balance. And I think when I heard 35 to 44, that is that time when you're still sort of in hustle mode and you believe you have to get it all done. When you think about the moment that we're in, still very much in this pandemic where people aren't quite back to work or they're working from home and getting burnout that way because there's no escape. What advice do you have for those people who are watching and are wondering what needs to be sort of the wake-up call, and how do you deal with that once you've identified that you're burnt out?
So ideally, you need to address it before you are burnt out. But whether you're already burnt out or you want to prevent it, the key, and that's the work we're doing with hundreds of companies, is to add some micro steps in the course of your day that will interrupt the stress cycle. I mean, as you know, stress is unavoidable. There is no job that does not involve stress, but it's cumulative stress that's the killer. So if we can interrupt it during the day, whether it's with the 60-second pauses to breathe, or to remind ourselves what we're grateful for, or to walk around our desk. All these interruptions, believe it or not, according to the latest neuroscience, in 60 to 90 seconds, we can interrupt the stress cycle. So it's great to have well-being days and well-being weeks, but we also need to bring these interventions in the course of our day, in the middle of Zoom or Slack or Teams or whatever you are doing, and for companies to realize the intimate connection between well-being and mental resilience, productivity, retention, attrition, all the business metrics that they care for.
Arianna Huffington, great advice and really tying it all together when you think about the companies, when you think about the people, and something as simple as being grateful, taking a deep breath. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Have a good one. Former Sunday Morning correspondent Terrence Smith is out with a new memoir called 4 Wars, 5 Presidents. It includes a story about an encounter with the father of Sirhan, the man convicted of assassinating Robert F. Kennedy.
My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there. Thank you very much.
When Robert Kennedy was shot in Los Angeles on June 5th, 1968,
would a doctor come right here?
I was thousands of miles away in Jerusalem, Israel, as a correspondent for the New York Times. I quickly learned that the shooter's father, Sirhan Sr., lived in a small village in the West Bank. It was 10 p.m. and dark by the time I arrived at the Sirhan house. I rapped on the door, and a small man in his pajamas answered. I explained that I was a reporter, and typical of Palestinian hospitality, Sirhan Sr. invited me in and insisted on making coffee. I asked him if he had heard that Kennedy had been shot. Yes, he said, and thought it was terrible news. I asked him if he had heard that the assassin had been caught on the spot. Yes, he said. I asked one more question. Had he heard the name of the captured assassin? No, he said. He'd gone to bed and had not heard it. Just stunned, I pushed my reporter's notebook across the kitchen table and asked him to write the names of his 5 sons. The 4th name in the list, Sirhan Jr. I put my finger on that name and looked him in the eye and said, "That's the assassin." Sirhan was shocked, first incredulous, then angry. Sirhan Jr. had been the best of his boys, he said. Then his face darkened, and he said, if he did it, he should hang. With more reporting, I learned the Sirhan family had been deeply troubled. The father had lost his job and blamed the Israelis. He beat his wife and sons, and the mother escaped by moving with the boys to California. Sirhan Jr. grew up hating the Israelis and hating anyone who supported Israel. Anyone, that is, like Robert Kennedy. Should the 77-year-old assassin be granted parole after 5 decades in prison? As someone who admired Robert Kennedy, I can't claim to be objective. But I would say no. Not now, not in 18 months at the next parole hearing. I'd say the governor got it right.
Terrence Smith for us, thank you. A woman is now the commander of the USS Constitution for the first time in its 224-year history. Nancy Chen spoke exclusively with Commander Billy Farrell about how it feels to be at the helm of the world's oldest commissioned warship.
Launched in 1797 as one of the Navy's 6 original frigates, the USS Constitution's history is American history.
It is an honor to introduce Commander B.J. Farrell.
And now a new order, as Commander Billy Farrell becomes the first woman to serve as captain.
And there's only 76 other people in history that have commanded this ship.
And now you're going to be the 77th.
Correct. So it's an amazing feeling.
The 39-year-old was second in command of a guided missile cruiser before her new assignment. President George Washington ordered the ship to be built, and only men have been in charge. Until now. The Constitution still sails at least once a year. A third of its active duty crew, women.
It's such a special opportunity, not just for the ship, but the Navy as a whole, especially having all the public here. They get to see that there's a female leading us.
Docked in Boston, the ship hosts more than 500,000 visitors annually. As a teenager, Farrell was one of them.
What would you tell that young woman today?
Even if I told her that one day she would be commanding the ship, she wouldn't believe me. So I think I would just tell my younger self to just keep doing your best, and you'll find yourself in some unusual places.
Taking the helm and commanding a new course in history. Nancy Chen, CBS News, Boston.
Nearly 24 panda cubs made their public debut to welcome in the 2022 Chinese New Year. The 20 panda toddlers were seen playing in the snow right there during a ceremony at a zoo in southwest China. The event marked the year of the tiger and the upcoming Beijing Winter Olympics. The zoo is part of a research base for giant pandas. I prefer the stuffed animals, even though I'm wearing the colors of the pandas. Coming up, it's Eye on America. CBS Saturday Morning co-host Michelle Miller explores an alternative music program that's helping to show high schoolers a different path in life. Every week, Michelle will bring us stories of Americans who innovate and inspire to solve some of the nation's most pressing issues. You can stream the premiere next. Stay with us.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I genuinely love the process of manipulating people online for money.
One man with total control of billions of people's stolen data.
Creating lies, denying truths.
Swap a face, make a face, change a voice. Now you have this very powerful machinery for creating synthetic media.
As new technology makes any video content possible.
I saw images of me taken from my social media and posted on these pornographic sites. It was completely horrifying.
How do we distinguish fact from fiction?
The technology has gotten so good that I think it's only a matter of time before deepfakes are used to influence an election.
What have you created?
A monster.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
Breaking news as it happens. CBS News New York on the CBS News app and Pluto TV.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Yoga and wellness has become a place of anti-science.
Online clickbait.
The algorithms feed you content based upon your own fantasy.
Potentially at my peril.
There's no question about it.
Spreading digital disinformation.
Their entire yoga studio and spiritual community got so embedded in all of the QAnon stuff that it became this sick place.
Why pro-health people are fertile ground for anti-science messages.
We can just go into the whole mask thing. A lot of us just believe that's symbolism for silencing people.
People are locked in this mindset. They've been taught to accept what the medical doctors say.
No longer are you going to be willing to take any medical advice.
It's a big problem that we urgently need to address.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
Minnesota's first local news stream is now CBS News Minnesota. Stream your trusted WCCO team for breaking news and weather live in real time on the CBS News app and on Pluto TV.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart.
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
CBS News.
This is what fire crews are up against.
Breaking news streaming all day long.
And always just a click away. Up next, stories you'll be talking about today.
Stories digging deeper.
With more context and perspective.
You traveled the whole way with your son?
The highest quality journal.
Or where?
But why? This is CBS News.
I'm Michelle Miller for CBS News. This is Eye on America, where we take an inside look at the nation's most pressing issues. We'll introduce you to the problem solvers and solution seekers who are proving to be the heartbeat of our country. We begin with America's next generation